Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch 2020, our new show following all the news and rumors on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. I'm Damon Hatfield. I'm joined this week by Ryan McCaffrey, host of IGN's Xbox podcast, Podcast Unlocked, and Jonathan Dornbush, host of our PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond. Now, each of us is calling into the show from our homes this week because of the mandated shelter-in-place requirement here in the Bay Area. But the show must go on, as they say, and there is so much next-gen news to talk about this week. It's going to be a huge show. We're going to take a look at PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X specs, and of course, we'll have poll results from last week. But first, now that we officially know the PlayStation 5 specs, we can get to comparing and contrasting the two consoles. Gentlemen, let's try to keep this civil. Who has a first impression, and is one of these next gen consoles clearly more powerful than the other one?
You know, I'm gonna jump in just real quick because Jonathan and I were talking a little before the show, and I think first of all, this sounds dumb, but I think we're all in really good shape in this new gen. But Jonathan, tell me if you agree. I think where we kind of stand here is a V8 engine in the form of the Xbox Series X and a turbocharged V6 in the form of the PS5, where they both sort of tackle the same problem in two different ways and really arrive at largely the same place, the same performance, just approaching it through a couple different ways. Was that your take?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, now that we've seen both system spec lists, the Xbox Series X has a higher teraflop number, just pure raw power there. It is higher. I think our tech editor, Bo Moore, has said it's an 18% increase or difference in power there. Whereas what we've seen from the, PlayStation 5's GPU is it's running at a higher clock speed versus the Xbox Series X. So if you listen to how Mark Cerny addressed the PS5 tech and the specs revealed during that big, long, in-depth, what would have been a GDC talk, clearly they are looking at this problem that they have of how do we increase the power of next gen as not a teraflop number problem, but they are trying to approach it from a different point of view. We'll have to see when the games are out whose order of operations worked out to be the best. But obviously, I think, as Ryan said, they're coming at it and both probably going to roughly end up around the same space.
Yeah, we've got 12.155 officially teraflops for the Xbox Series X, with the CUs running at 1.825 gigahertz, and there are 52 of those CUs, versus on the PS5 side, 10.28 teraflops, with the GPU running at 2.23 gigahertz per CU, but only 36 of those. So again, same destination, different way to get there. More CUs running at a lower clock on the Xbox side, whereas fewer CUs rather, running at a higher clock for the PS5. So it's interesting to see how they each sort of arrived at this same destination.
Yeah, and they're both going to have their different solid state drives, which was a big emphasis for Cerny during that larger talk about how theirs is really emphasizing a certain number of different problems that they're hoping they can sort of erase for game developers and then for the players through that development. But
yeah, and then we've got the on the CPU side, the Xbox Series X can run up to 3.8 gigahertz on the CPU level, unless it multi-threads, in which case each thread can run at 3.6 gigahertz, whereas the PS5 caps out on the CPU side at 3.5 gigahertz. So again, sort of subtle differences there. Both have the same 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory. And then, yeah, from there you kind of get into the secret sauce on each, like Jonathan was starting to get to with the storage.
So I think we've all resigned ourselves to the fact that these consoles have to cost at least $500. And after we got the full Xbox specs earlier this week, some people were thinking, man, this thing might cost $600 or $700. But now that we're looking at both of them, do we expect they'll probably cost the same amount, or is there a chance that maybe the PlayStation 5 could be a little bit cheaper?
Jonathan?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I mean, I definitely think it comes down to one, who announces price first, and then how the other company decides to react. Obviously, they are going to be competing in this space, and one company may be more willing to take a hit financially than the other, or they might both or both not. And so seeing who announces first could change that. I think they'll likely, now that we see the specs, probably be close in price point.
Mhm.
And as far as we know, there's no sort of added peripheral going into either box, like with the Xbox One and Kinect, that'll sort of raise the price quite a bit. But I'd expect them to be pretty close in price this time around. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, let's talk about backwards compatibility. Both consoles have them in a fashion, but Xbox's backwards compatibility plan is much more expansive than Sony's. Sony said today that almost 100 of the most popular PlayStation 4 games will be backwards compatible on PS5. What do you make about that, Jonathan? That seems like a much narrower escape for backwards compatibility than Xbox.
How many PS4 games are you really going to be playing when the PS5 comes out? I mean, there's no way to, sugarcoat it or try to find the silver line. It is just an inferior implementation of this than what Xbox is doing. Xbox has been working on bringing past generations into the modern gen since much earlier in the Xbox One life cycle, and obviously that hasn't been a part of the PS4 life cycle. So, PlayStation is playing a bit of catch up here, and it seems the way they were describing the way these games will be working on the PS5, it is taking a little bit of, additional work to get them working in that fashion. And so they said around 100 games at launch with more to come afterwards, and they'll give us updates. I think that is just unfortunately the reality we're going to have to deal with. I will probably keep as many of my PS4 games alive as I can, but knowing some may not be able to carry through the next gen, I may keep my PS4 Pro around a little longer than I would have thought.
Yeah, sure. What about expandable storage? Both manufacturers talked about this week. Both have expandable storage, but it seems like Sony has a little bit more of an open market approach to that. Ryan, is it true that the Xbox Series X has proprietary expandable storage?
Yeah, for now they're talking explicitly about one Seagate branded official 1 terabyte storage add-on device for it to add an extra 1 terabyte. We don't have a price on that. Whereas, as you mentioned on the Sony side, they are opening it up to more manufacturers, but it has to meet a standard. So Mark Cerny was very quick and adamant to emphasize, don't go out and buy anything now because there isn't anything that's suitable for PS5 yet. So that could, in time, whether it's right out of the gate or a bit down the road, lead to some cheaper add-on options storage-wise for PS5. But at least out of the gate, you are getting a roughly 25% more storage out of the box with the Xbox Series X with its 1 terabyte, whereas we're at 825 gigabytes on the PS5.
Yeah, what did you make about that, Jonathan? Does the Xbox just have more storage, or is that 825 the usable storage of a terabyte?
That was actually a question I don't know for certain. Is something we're looking into because it is a strange number, I'll admit, to say your hard drive or the drive size is. Normally we're used to a gig, 250, 500, sort of more round numbers like that. So we'll have to look into, I think a little bit more honestly, what that number ends up being. But obviously the OSs on either console are probably going to take up a little bit of a chunk. But Cerny did talk about the fact that what they're hoping they've put into their SSD and what the applications and new features they've been working with AMD on specifically for their custom build, and each console has a custom built SSD. They're hoping theirs will, I think, offset some of the needs that maybe games might have that cause such large file sizes. Whether that or not that turns out to be the case, we'll have to see when the games are actually made. But that seems to be the discrepancy at the moment.
Okay, so all these specs and numbers, that's all well and good, but what's your read on which manufacturer has the most exciting proposition at this time? Now that Sony's finally starting to talk about the PlayStation 5, which company has the best messaging and is doing the best job of getting people excited about their console?
For me, I mean, I definitely think Microsoft had more to prove than Sony heading into this. And I think thus far, I think they've done an outstanding job of really showing you why you should upgrade. I mean, they've been very clear that, hey, for the first couple of years, we're gonna offer all of the same experiences on Xbox One, on Xbox One X. But for me, they've shown 4K 60 for everything, or 1080p 120. They showed Gears 5 running. They just ported it straight over to the Series X in a couple weeks without even doing any optimization work, and had it running at ultra high PC settings at 100 frames per second, and have talked about they may offer a multiplayer option that lets you run multiplayer at 120 frames per second. So they showed that. They showed off the quick resume of bouncing back and forth quickly with about a 5 or 6 second wait time between 5 different games all running at once and just jumping into the exact place you left it on each one. They talked about, Jonathan mentioned the backwards compatibility. Not only is Microsoft has been committed to this for a long, long time now, you're talking 4 generations of Xbox games that are playable on Series X, including everything on Xbox One, and everything that is coming forward will be automatically enhanced. Microsoft again showed a demo of Halo 5 with HDR, which it never shipped with. 343 never built it in, but they were able, the compatibility team, able to make that happen. So there is a lot more to see and learn yet with PS5. Microsoft had to step up and really make a great case for themselves. I think they did that. I mean, it's no disrespect to Mark Cerny and what we have seen of PS5 so far, but I would give the edge to Microsoft right now.
How about you, Jonathan? This is obviously Sony's game to lose.
It is, and they are, I think, operating from a place of not wanting to show their full hand. As Ryan said, Microsoft is in the second place of this generation between the two and does need to prove what they have. With that said, though, I think they've been doing a pretty great job of proving what they've had, whereas I'd argue PlayStation just not only hasn't shown us what they have, but they're not even sure where that roadmap is going. It feels like it sometimes, because right now you look at officially what we've seen from Microsoft. We've seen Halo Infinite in an E3 press conference. We've seen Hellblade 2. We've seen the box. We've seen these specs, and we've seen tech demos. PlayStation officially has only shown the PS5 logo and this Mark Cerny talk. They have not shown any games running on PlayStation 5. The pretty well-known now Spider-Man demo running on PS4 Pro versus PS5 is a leaked video from a joint investors call or something similar to that fashion. We don't really have any official assets or proof from PlayStation, so I still think they need to actually show that. And when they do, I have full confidence it'll be amazing. You know, they're going into this generation. It's not like they've lost Naughty Dog or Guerrilla Games or Sony Santa Monica. Now they have Insomniac. Like, they have a lot of great heavy hitters making games for them. They just need to show it.
Joining us now to dig into each console a little bit more is IGN's executive tech editor, Bo Moore. Let's talk a little bit about 3D audio. This is a big focus for Sony, and I think I understand what 3D audio does, but what sort of benefit does the PlayStation 5 have? What is it offering? What problem is it solving in that realm?
Yeah, so Cerny went into great detail that frankly was above my head about, I believe it's Project Tempest or something, or the Tempest audio, that, you know, this will be when you're using headphones, to be clear, like, you're not going to be able to get this kind of special, fantastic, crazy 3D audio without some sort of absurd setup with your speakers. But yeah, so when you're on headphones, he's really trying to achieve, he kept using a term that we frequently hear when we're talking about VR, which is the word is presence, which is the idea of feeling like you're there in the room or in the scene with whatever you're experiencing in the game, rather than, you know, just hearing an audio version of that. And so the Tempest 3D audio tech is really, they're hoping to reach that level where when you're in a game and you're listening to the audio coming in from the game, that it really sounds like you're there in that scene, rather than just hearing, you know, an approximation of it.
Jonathan, what were your impressions of what they talked about 3D audio today?
So that was the part that actually intrigued me the most, and it is a thing we're going to have to see when it's put into application in games. But I think about sound's use in gaming right now, and it's so funny to me because we were having this discussion on our PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond. We were discussing, you know, when we're looking at the next gen, we're always like, how better are the graphics? But we don't often say how much better is the sound quality. And I do see this as sort of Cerny and Sony as a whole trying to say, we are holding sound to the same tier of importance that we're holding visuals to, and that we are really trying to push the paradigm there, because it can really change your gameplay experience. I mean, something in a horror game, the presence of feeling like you're in this world, feeling maybe you're trapped by a monster, is a really impressive thing to be able to pull off. Conversely, you think of a game like Fortnite, and it's actually really important to be able to know where the footsteps of your enemies or where a gunfire in the background may have been coming from. That can mean the difference between a win or a loss. And so seeing that there are already applications 3D audio could be making and enhancing games that we currently have, I love the idea that this is a big focus for them, and that is a major driving point for PS5.
Okay, let's switch gears back to Xbox Series X for a minute. We've got Ryan McCaffrey back. Now, both Sony and Microsoft are talking a lot about ray tracing. The difference is that Sony has only talked about it and Microsoft has shown it in both Minecraft and Gears 5. And Ryan, you've been excited by what you've seen so far. Is that right?
Yeah, I've obviously been excited about Series X. The idea of 4K 60 sounds great. The faster loading times has sounded great. And we finally got a look at that this week and what it actually looks like switching back and forth between multiple games. Resume your state, no problem. But boy, I was really, really impressed with the actual ray tracing demo that was shown. They showed some global illumination stuff on the lighting side with Gears 5. But Minecraft, of all things, Minecraft looked amazing. I mean, it's on paper seemingly a strange choice to use the simplistic game that is Minecraft, simplistic from a visual perspective, but it does have a unique style. And boy, when they turned on that ray tracing, that demo was incredibly impressive. Some almost literal night and day transitions with the lighting from ray tracing off to ray tracing on. And that has really got me looking forward to next gen, because sure, Halo Infinite's going to be there on day one for Xbox One, Xbox One X, as well as Series X, but I'm going to want to see that and play that game with the ray tracing turned on for sure.
All right, Bo. So similar to how we were talking previously about how short to no load times could be the new standard going forward, is ray tracing going to be the new standard? Every game will have ray tracing now?
I think not at all. I think that ray tracing is still, at least for a couple of years, very much going to be an aspirational feature. I think we will see it on some first-party titles. Like, if Microsoft really wants to push ray tracing, then yeah, we'll probably see it in stuff like Halo and Gears and stuff. Same thing over on Sony's side. The really big flagship titles, we'll probably see it in whatever Naughty Dog is working on and games like that. But as far as across the board, ray tracing takes a ton of resources both to implement as well as it's a huge performance hit. Like, it's important to remember that ray tracing has been around for, a while, but available to PC gamers for about 2 years now, since it became possible with the RTX series of graphics cards from NVIDIA. But even in that time, like, it's taken a lot of time for even a handful. It's only available in a handful of games. Control, Metro Exodus, and a few others even have ray tracing at all, because it took time for those developers to implement the tech. And then when you turn it on, it's a huge performance hit. So, I don't think we're going to be getting 4K at 60 with ray tracing. Like, maybe, we haven't seen what the 12 and 10.2 teraflop graphics cards can do, with the ray tracing built into the system. So I don't know, maybe the consoles are doing more to kind of just integrate it into the process where it'll be easier to implement than what we've seen on PC. But, it'll really be just we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, it did seem like
breaking Ryan's heart.
It did seem like from Microsoft's presentation of things that they were talking about a theoretical 25 teraflop performance with ray tracing going. So it seems like they have a dedicated DirectX-based hardware solution, which I would imagine whatever they have, Sony's probably got something similar, since they're both AMD. There's the same fundamental chipset. But I love you, Bo, but I hope you're wrong on this one. I hope ray tracing is going to be a lot more prevalent right from the jump.
All right, thank you for your insights, Bo. Now let's take a look at last week's poll results. We polled the IGN audience with the question, if next-gen consoles come in tiered versions, which version do you plan on getting? And the overwhelming majority of you said you plan on getting the highest-end premium version possible. Biggest storage, the best pack-ins. 63.2% of you want only the high-end models. Ryan, Jonathan, does that surprise you?
Not in the slightest. I mean, if you're watching this show, you have a major interest in next gen.
Yeah.
And if you're hosting the show or a panelist on this show, you've got a major interest in next gen. I voted that same thing. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Jonathan, how about you?
I want the cheapest bargain bin version they can offer. No, I mean it. As
You're one
Ryan
of the
said,
9%.
one of the 9%. No, it absolutely makes sense. Obviously, if there was a major price difference and it maybe impacted my wallet a lot, I might consider, whether or not to get a lower tiered system. But especially at launch, I want the next generation to impress me as much as possible right from the get-go. So it makes sense that you'd want the most hard drive space you need, the best performing console, whatever it is. I totally understand why our audience would and probably should vote that way.
All right, well, we have a really big question for our poll next week. After the big reveals this week, we know the specs of both systems. Where do you stand? It's time to let us know which side you are on. Which next-gen system would you choose if you had to choose today? Are you all in on Xbox Series X, or are you a PlayStation 5 person? Vote at IGN.com, and we will share the results with you next week. And that will about do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch 2020. Thank you, Ryan, Jonathan, and Bo. Make sure you check back next Friday at 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern for more PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X news. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you then.